Hi, Gareth here at SIOAAA talking about the differences between service requests and requests for change. Ask yourself, how would you explain to end users what the difference is between a service request and a request for change? Is it well defined wherever it is that you manage IT services when a request is used rather than an RFC, or conversely when a change is used rather than a request? If you're finding it hard to explain the difference without loads of caveats, or wherever you work it's confused regarding what is a request or a change, don't worry, you're not on your own. So let's make this the idiot-proof guide between the differences. Now this should be pretty standard stuff, and it is, but every company I've worked for, there's always an element of confusion between the two in certain scenarios. Whether you're working in the IT function or not, it can be unclear when you raise a request, when do you raise a change, and what's the relationship between the two. This can come about because different organisations have organic, specific ways of working based on how they operate, the operating model in place, how their IT services are structured and delivered. For example, is that completely in-house, completely outsourced, a mix of the two? And in those scenarios, who is raising what? Is that for a supplier? Is it for the in-house team? Is it for end users? And to cater for all of those different scenarios, nuances or bespoke processes are implemented just to allow IT to operate. So let's start off really basically with what service requests are. So a service request is an end user requesting for something to be provided to them by IT. Very simple on the face of it. Those service requests are linked to a request model, and the request model, specific to that request, is a defined set of steps taken to fulfill that request with a defined outcome. And those request models form part of the request catalogue. Now, each of those request models should carry a price tag. What does it cost the end user or the business function to provide that outcome for the end user? Factoring in the cost of effort, the resources required to deliver, and of course, if your model is delivering an asset, the cost of that asset. I won't get into here the differing ways that IT can cost and charge the business for those service requests. That's a whole other topic. But given service requests are providing something at cost to an end user, there may be approval steps built into your process to make sure the delivery of the service request is managed and controlled. For example, you wouldn't want somebody just sat at a desk ordering keyboard after keyboard after keyboard. IT are going to quickly run out of keyboards and trigger their internal process to restock, and that in turn is going to add extra unnecessary cost to your customer. Analogy time then. So if you've ever used Amazon, this concept will be completely familiar to you. You are accessing Amazon's request catalogue. When you place an order, you are in effect raising a service request. And behind the scenes, the good folks at Amazon, on receipt of your order, follow the request model for that item in order to fulfill your request and deliver your outcome, which is whatever it is that you've ordered landing on your doorstep. And it's not just for products, but for services too. If you go to log into your Amazon account and you've forgotten your password, in effect, the whole process of you requesting a new password is behind the scenes following a set of agreed, approved steps to deliver that outcome to you, a new password. Okay, so that's a service request. Doesn't get more simple than that. So an RFC, or request for change, to give it its full title, again, very simple, standard stuff. Effectively, an RFC is the function that owns the delivery of a business or technical service to a customer, is requesting approval from the Change Advisory Board, or CAB for short, that they can amend an element of that service for whatever reason that they need to. You know these, but for example, that might be they need to make a change to keep the service operational. It might be in response to fixing an incident or addressing root cause of a problem, or part of a service improvement, or indeed even as part of fulfilling a request model. So in short, somebody who owns or operates an IT service making a request internally to the IT function that they can make a change to that service. So, key difference. Service request comes from a user of an IT service asking for something predefined to be provided. A request for change comes from the function that owns the IT service asking approval to amend their service. So, where does the confusion creep in with that then? A common one I've seen in different organisations is where users are asking for something that is not standard, not defined as part of an existing catalogue item. And I've seen it firsthand where users are told, yeah, you'll need to raise a change for that. However, in that scenario, the answer is never for a user to raise an RFC or request for change. And I'll tell you why. Firstly, think about the change process and what is required for the change to successfully get implemented. The originator has to specify what steps are going to be taken to implement the change, who is doing that and when they're doing it, how will that be tested and communicated, and if things don't get to plan, how will that change be backed out? A user asking for something that is not standard, not part of the catalogue, isn't going to be able to provide that detail. And more to the point, end users aren't really approved to make those sorts of requests for change outside of consultation from the business unit that owns, from a business perspective, that particular service. What do I mean by that? Well, for example, let's say all of your users have access to a HR system that allows them to book their annual leave online. Now, one day, 3 different users all decide that they don't like the look of the current system, and each one raises a RFC to make the background colour of the application something different to their liking. Firstly, would the HR department be comfortable with end users of their system or tool being able to make those sorts of decisions? Well, no, of course they're not. Which of those changes does the IT department fulfill? Well, 2 or 3 of the users are going to be disappointed. And would those users be able to provide all that necessary information required as part of the change process to detail how that change is going to happen? Well, no, they're not. So end users of an IT service don't raise changes, they only raise service requests. In that specific scenario, there needs to be a process by which those non-standard things can be captured from end users by the business owner, and the business owner has a mechanism to raise non-standard requests of its IT service provider in order to fulfill those changes it deems necessary. And that process can take on many different forms. For example, there may be a mini project initiation, there may be a routine software delivery lifecycle process, but in short, whatever form that process takes, they're not service requests, or not standard service requests at least. Those non-standard requests need to be scoped for time, effort, costs. Proper requirements will need to be defined, captured and solutionized, and then ultimately delivered. Now, the delivery of those is most likely going to result in 1 or more change requests, but it's going to be the service owner function of that service raising the changes, and not the customer, not the end users, and not the business owner. So back to our example of the HR application, the HR department may frequently solicit feedback from its end users on how well the system is working for them, and identify certain things that may need to change or certain enhancements. They're going to need to ask IT to carry out those amendments, and they may have previously agreed with IT that on a quarterly basis they will submit a bunch of enhancement requests, and IT will scope those, how they will be delivered, the costs of doing so, and then deliver that back to the HR department. To do that, the IT department are going to need to raise changes in order to fulfill that and keep the necessary audit trail. And off the back of non-standard requests, that can result in creation of additional items to be added to a request catalogue. So let's say HR identify from their user base that they need to have a solution to allow their users to check their payslips online. IT will, via whatever mechanism, deliver that. That might form a mini project. And as part of defining the support model for that new function, it's determined users will need to be able to request of IT that they can be granted access to that service. Therefore, a request model will be defined and added to the catalogue that allows users to call up or via a portal log a service request for access to that tool, which of course IT can then fulfill. The other scenario I've seen this confusion arise is typically where IT departments have outsourced an element of their service to an outsourced provider. And internally within the collective IT operating model, it's unclear when those two organisations are working together how one asks for something of the other. For example, let's stick with the HR holiday booking system. Now, let's say the internal IT team are responsible for the app. They may have bought something off the shelf which they then configure, but it's hosted on infrastructure provided by a third-party provider. Now, to fulfill one of these non-standard requests I was talking about, the IT application team have raised a change to implement new functionality. And as part of that change, they need the IT provider to do something. Now, just like the internal IT team delivering services to end users need to keep control about what's done by whom and when, well, the same is true for the IT provider delivering their service to their customer, the internal IT team, which is based on the scope and cost of the contracts it has in place. What if suddenly the HR department had a huge uptake in demand and the business have decided these new requirements take absolute priority, and now IT are having to raise many more changes in order to fulfill those requests? This is going to result in an increase of the time required from the supplier. It may be more than that was contractually agreed. And as these suppliers are businesses too, they'll need to make sure commercially that this is covered. Of course, their resource is finite too, and they'll need to ensure that they can provide what's required in order to support the internal IT team. So in this scenario, it's not uncommon for internal IT teams to have request models available to them by their supplier in order for them to fulfill what is needed. And again, that may result in the need for the supplier to raise a change on their side in order for them to do that. So to complete the trail using our example of the HR holiday booking system, so HR will raise a non-standard request by whatever process that has been agreed between the business and IT for IT to amend their holiday booking system. The IT department raise a change to deliver that request once it's been scoped and costed, etc. And as part of that change, the IT team raise a request to their infrastructure provider to reboot the server that application sits on at an agreed time and date. And on the supplier's side, it's most likely that they will raise a change to carry out that activity and to keep an audit log that at this date and time, this is happening. Now, that sounds long-winded, but it is clear who's doing what under which process at the right time in order to properly manage the outcome. In this sort of scenario, it's really beneficial to have neatly defined request models, which can take time to properly define and implement. It can also be really beneficial to use any automation available via ITSM toolsets to automate parts of those processes, and using process mechanisms like standard changes to ensure the activity carried out is not only done to a high quality and reliably, but also in the most expedient way possible. Right then, that's cleared that up. See you next time at SIOAAA. If your IT service management is hanging, well, switch it off and on again. Cheers.